If you view yourself as a leftist or progressive, you probably think that a positive view on immigration is inherently tied to those ideologies. And you're not wrong. Many leftists view citizenship itself as an oppressive ideology, limiting the rights and freedoms of people seeking to move to new places for new opportunities. But that doesn't tell the full picture. There's more to it than that. So let's talk about what you, me, and everybody else gets wrong about immigration.
Okay.
All right, let's do this. Before we get started, if you could like and subscribe and leave comments as we go, keep up with the conversation, it will really help me as I launch more long-form content with the help of my editor. My dad immigrated to Canada as a young child, and my aunt and my uncle and all of my grandparents on both sides of my family also immigrated to Canada as well. And before you start thinking, oh yeah, but your family integrated into Canadian society, maybe not. My aunt has been in Canada for over 50 years, but you wouldn't be able to tell that from her English skills. This isn't about where you came from or when you came here. This is about how capital structures have conspired to create a system by which corporate interests are taking advantage of foreigners while simultaneously depriving Canadians of a good quality of life, all while pitting us against each other. Immigrants are inherently critical to the developing culture and workforce of Canada, and almost all evidence points to immigrants and refugees being a net benefit for the economy, with most newcomers committing on average less crimes than domestic-born citizens. Immigration is also central to Canada's growth plan, especially as we face an aging boomer demographic, meaning less working taxpayers and more citizens reliant on old age security and public programs. So what are we wrong about exactly? Now let's be clear, there are many forms of immigration and many types of programs that bring in foreign workers. And while it's easy to conflate these programs, we have to be mindful to keep them separate. And that's part of what this is about and why we're wrong when we talk about immigration. With many Canadians now thinking we have too many immigrants, where is this idea coming from and does it hold merit? Immigration in Canada is at an all-time high, beating out our previous records prior to World War I. That isn't a problem. What is a problem is that Canada hasn't invested properly in development and infrastructure to accommodate for this growth as we did in the early 1900s. But even if Canada fulfilled the white nationalist fantasy and cut immigration numbers and massively boosted domestic birth rates, we would still be facing the exact same problems. We've let our infrastructure crumble, leading to water crises in multiple Canadian cities, and municipalities have been underfunded to the point where growth is simply not possible. Many projects that could help ease issues are either being halted by NIMBYs or cannot be paid for as citizens fight against property tax increases, which would help fund those projects that the same citizens are demanding. The issue of housing has not been caused by immigrants. It's the fault of our own government's lack of ambition and our over-reliance on the supposed free market, which actively suppresses developments. But why would any market do that? What is the economic function of limiting supply? Okay, I'm about to go teacher mode on you, bear with me, because I actually use this next brand example in my class. You remember Supreme? Your Zoomer nieces and nephews do. A brand built up entirely on scarcity. I had students who bought Supreme bricks, crowbars, fire extinguishers, and other random goods, all in the hopes of flipping and reselling them, with prices going up over time due to scarcity and increased demand due to hype. They all lost money. This same scheme is the mechanism behind the artificial value of NFTs, and it is also part of the reason why our housing shortage exists. Simply put, if there is less supply and demand outstrips the supply by a large amount, suppliers of a good that is necessary, like housing for example, in the form of a purchase or rental, can gouge the market. There was a period of time where rent in many areas was higher than the cost of a mortgage for that property. That level of greed is unsustainable and abhorrent. This is a far more complex issue that we can get into in another video, but essentially, there are market forces preventing us from building more homes. That, on top of zoning regulations preventing density and a focus on highways and sprawl, is making it more and more difficult to properly house Canadians, especially in Ontario and especially in the GTA. But there are fundamental reasons why progressives and leftists should be skeptical of our current immigration patterns. Those air quotes are doing a lot of heavy lifting there, as the things that people tend to complain about when they complain about immigration isn't in fact immigration. I've seen progressives, liberals, and conservatives all comment on the same issue, especially in regards to the GTA. We've all seen the ads of horrible housing conditions for insanely high prices, squishing more people than is safe into a small room. These are not safe living conditions, and we shouldn't be tolerating it. But the people who end up living in these conditions aren't typically immigrants or Canadian citizens. It's the other group that people tend to lump in when talking generally about immigration. Let's be honest for a second. Canada, and especially Ontario in particular, has become addicted to temporary foreign workers and international students. And these are for different reasons. There is nothing fundamentally wrong with having temporary foreign workers in Canada. What there is an issue with, however, is how we treat them and the way that the expansion of these programs has been abused to the benefit of the interests of capital, all while exploiting marginalized groups who otherwise have their work permits dangled over their heads as leverage. Historically, temporary foreign workers in Canada have mainly worked on our farms, doing jobs that farmers say many Canadians aren't willing to do. The optimistic capitalist will tell you that it's a great system, one which provides a foreign worker with the ability to make a lot more money than they otherwise would have been able to back at home. What that leaves out, however, is the abuse these people face at the hands of our system. There's a reason that guys like Elon Musk and Donald Trump are defending the American equivalent, the H-1B visa program. When abused, these programs allow for Western companies to hire temporary foreign workers at a lower salary than they would have otherwise paid a domestic citizen. These programs are meant to fill in labor gaps when there is no domestic alternative. Instead, it's being used to create a system by which foreign laborers are held hostage. The system benefits capital, not Canadians, and not foreigners. Workers brought to Canada through an LMIA, which is a labor market impact assessment which is used to justify the worker, are not planned or projected for when our municipalities and provinces consider housing and infrastructure. This creates an additional demand strain on housing, and unfortunately, many temporary foreign workers end up living in these slum conditions that everyone seems to agree are bad, albeit maybe for different political and ideological reasons. And this LMIA system is being abused, creating a pipeline by which employers are not only posting fake jobs and then refusing to hire Canadians, but they then turn around and auction off the right to come work in Canada to a foreign worker who then feels trapped and unable to speak up because their ability to live in Canada rests on the employer who is abusing them. It's essentially financial Stockholm syndrome. This benefit to the corporate class comes at the expense of Canadians who would be willing to work at these jobs for a fair market rate, as well as at the literal expense and the abuse of these foreign workers. And that's not the only way that our society has deemed it acceptable to abuse foreigners. In his never-ending quest to reduce our institutions to useless husks, Doug Ford, in his almighty wisdom, has severely cut funding to colleges and universities, and he basically said, figure it out. This led to the massive uptick in international students seen in Canada. While Ontario is approximately 40% of the Canadian population, we have over 50% of Canada's international students. We have seen massive growth across Canada, specifically in Ontario. Many international students in the past have used school and the work that follows as a way to become Canadian citizens, and this is inherently a good thing. We want people who come to our schools to use those skills in our economy. But these international students pay massively higher tuitions, which are essentially used to offset the cost for Canadians. At the same time, there is no provincial incentive to ensure that these students are filling in niches or gaps in our education system or skills that are required in our workforce, as the province wants to abuse these international students and their pocketbooks to bankroll public education. Both private and public colleges have essentially become diploma mills. But for our public institutions, Doug's funding cuts means that without these international students, they wouldn't be able to operate at all, meaning a loss of educational opportunities for Canadians. This is becoming even more important as the federal government has placed international student caps on the provinces, all while Doug continues to reduce funding. It also doesn't help when a small subsection of international students seem to be abusing the system as a way to live here without actually going to school. And yes, if we're going to talk about this, we do also have to talk about these nitpicking situations. It's part of the domestic conversation. People are going to talk about it, so we have to engage with it too. And similar to the LMIA system, international students are an unexpected influx of people who need places to work and live, placing a strain on the system. I want to reiterate, this is not the fault of international students or temporary foreign workers. They are also victims in this predatory system. If we believe that all immigration is good and we shouldn't restrict it, what do we do about these programs that are seemingly inherently designed to abuse foreigners? I'm not declaring moral or intellectual superiority here. I genuinely want to start a conversation about this because there are legitimately leftist economic arguments that can be made to argue against a mass increase in our population outside of planned immigration targets. Think back to the Great Resignation of 2021. As people were fed up with their working conditions and low wages, they began to quit en masse. In many US states, low-wage employers such as fast food chains struggled to retain workers, leading to the largest jump in wages in years. In some more remote locations, it wouldn't be uncommon to see a McDonald's advertising jobs for $20 or more per hour. And that's 20 American. That's a lot of Canadian dollars. What happened here was the basic market tenets of supply and demand applied to labor. Many capitalists and right-wing thinkers tend to only speak about the market and supply and demand in terms of what we are willing to pay for our products. But don't forget, there is also a supply of workers and a demand for our labor. When the supply of workers shrinks, but the demand for that work remains constant, prices, meaning wages, go up. If the free market is supposed to work as intended, this means that workers should also be able to exert market power and increase wages as necessary. Unfortunately, in Canada, it seems as though this wasn't the case. The LMIA programs were abused to bring in temporary foreign workers to fill jobs in Canada that there was a domestic supply for. Essentially, the federal government allowed for corporations to functionally ignore the basic market tenets of supply and demand. I'm looking at you, Galen Weston. As I mentioned earlier, temporary foreign workers are supposed to be brought in to fill in roles that employers cannot fill through domestic hiring, not because people aren't willing to work those jobs. This was a blatant corruption of our system, a slap in the face to Canadian workers, and led to the abuse of temporary foreign workers in our country. This trend is now being reversed as Canada is reckoning with its decisions. And this economic and corporate laziness also has a negative impact on our country as a whole. Canada's reliance on temporary foreign workers is used as a crutch to make up for shortcomings in our technological development. Productivity in Canada is stagnating when compared to the US, and Canadian corporations aren't innovating as they continue to focus on their bottom line. Once again, I'm looking at you, Galen Weston. Instead of making more money by being more productive, technologically advanced, or innovative, they are choosing to make more money by paying you less and by taking advantage of people to feign growth. And don't forget about the large influx of international students, many of whom needed a job to pay for the obscenely high tuition rates that Canadian institutions trap them with. All of this has led to stagnant wages in many low-wage sectors of the economy. If we want to encourage market power to be dissipated from the owning class and be put into the hands of the working class, we can either completely overhaul our current economic system or, hear me out, we have to ensure that corporations and government aren't rigging the system to only benefit one side. I want labor power to increase in Canada. I want us to be able to use the power of labor, supply and demand, and the free market system in which we live to increase wages, benefits, and working conditions for all Canadians, and for all people who are working in Canada in general. I also don't want to see foreigners and young international students be abused by slumlords and corporations. There is no blatantly correct left-right argument to be had here. The world is a messy place, and economics is a messy social science with no real answers that don't lead to other problems. But if we as Canadians want to start truly challenging the systems in place and push our government to put the interests of its citizens first, we need to start grappling with these difficult questions. I truly believe that Canada is made stronger through immigration. My family is an example of that. I also believe that we need to let our better angels guide us away from xenophobic attacks. It is in the interest of selfish politicians and corporate powers to have us at each other's throats, to find ways to other and to create in and out groups and to make this an argument of morality. They want the left to attack each other. They want us to eat each other. The truth of the matter is, though, this isn't a left-right fight. This is an up-down fight. And until we can put aside our differences and have these difficult conversations, we are all going to be wrong about immigration. If you like this video, please do me a huge favor, like, comment, and subscribe. If you have ideas for future videos, leave them in the comments. This is a new venture for me, so if you want to support me, the best way that you can do that is by sharing this video and by encouraging people to subscribe. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey.
Okay.